The horse had already thrown 3 handlers before the auction even started. Folks standing near the corral fence kept their boots planted firmly in the dust, ready to jump back at the slightest move from the wild animal. His dark coat rippled with tense muscles, and every time he pulled at the rope, the crowd shifted nervously. No one wanted to be the next one he knocked down. People whispered how he had broken through 2 wooden gates earlier that morning, and how the auctioneers had nearly decided to remove him from the sale. But they kept him in anyway, hoping someone brave or foolish enough would take the risk. That horse had become the main reason everyone gathered around the ring, not because they wanted him but because they feared him. Some buyers joked loudly to cover their worry, pretending they were not scared. They talked about how they had seen dangerous horses before, ones that needed heavy chains and tough riders. But none of their stories matched the tension rising in the tent. Even the seasoned ranch owners stood farther back than usual. Everyone stayed on edge, waiting to see if the wild horse would break free again. The air felt heavy with dust, sweat, and a strange kind of excitement that kept pulling more people toward the corral. They wanted to see what would happen next, even if they wanted nothing to do with the horse himself. The auctioneer, a man used to ordering crowds with ease, looked uneasy for the first time. His voice cracked as he tried to calm the energy in the ring, telling everyone to stay behind the marked line. He glanced repeatedly toward the wild horse as if expecting it to leap at him any second. He called for someone to keep the rope tighter, but the handlers were already doing all they could. They tugged and pulled, digging their heels into the dirt, but the animal had more strength than all of them combined. His eyes, fierce and alert, darted from one side of the crowd to the other, watching everything and trusting no one. Word had spread quickly that this horse had a history. People whispered about how he never let anyone near him, how he fought every command and refused every attempt to break him. One man claimed the horse had been kept isolated for months because no one could train him. Another said he was born from a strong bloodline but grew too wild for any stable. There was even talk that he had been passed from owner to owner, each one giving up faster than the last. That rumor alone made the crowd step back even more. No one wanted a problem animal, especially one known for causing injury. Yet something about the horse drew attention. Even in his fear and rage, there was a kind of power that made people stare. His movements were sharp but graceful, and his stance showed he was not weak or sick. He was simply untamed. And in a place where buyers love stories as much as livestock, this horse was an unforgettable sight. Still, no one planned to raise a hand when the bidding started. It was clear that whoever ended up buying him would inherit more trouble than benefit. On the far edge of the crowd stood a quiet farmer who had arrived late. He kept his hat low, trying to stay unnoticed among the loud bidders. He carried a worn look like life had given him more challenges than comfort. His boots were old, his coat patched at the elbows, and his eyes carried the tired weight of someone who worked from sunup to sundown. He watched the horse carefully, studying him in a way the others did not. While most people focused on the danger, he focused on the pattern of the horse's movements and the reason behind the fear. Something about the animal reminded him of things he had felt in his own life. He did not step forward yet, and no one paid attention to him. He was just another man in the back of the crowd. But the horse noticed him. It was subtle at first. The animal's ears twitched in his direction each time the farmer shifted his stance. While the horse kept snapping his head at everyone else, he paused for just a moment when his eyes passed over the far corner where the farmer stood. The crowd did not notice it, but the farmer did. He saw how the horse kept glancing toward him, like he sensed something different. It pulled at the farmer's curiosity, making him step a little closer to the ring. The auctioneer raised his voice, trying to sound confident again. He declared that the bidding would start despite the fear in the room. He joked that the horse might make a good challenge for someone who believed in second chances. But no one laughed. Buyers folded their arms or hid their hands, making sure the auctioneer did not accidentally count a flinch as a bid. A few people left the tent entirely, deciding there were safer animals elsewhere. The tension grew thicker as the handler tried to calm the horse again, only to be nearly dragged off his feet. Still, the farmer continued moving through the crowd. He didn't rush. He walked slowly, as if trying not to startle the atmosphere that already felt fragile. Some folks noticed him then. They wondered what someone like him was doing stepping closer, but they said nothing. They assumed he was just curious. They guessed he did not have enough money to buy anything at the auction anyway. When the farmer reached the front, the horse lifted his head high. For the first time, he stopped pulling at the rope. His breathing slowed just enough for the nearest handlers to relax a little. A few townsfolk exchanged looks, trying to understand what caused the sudden stillness. But no one found a clear answer. Some thought the horse was tired. Others believed he was planning another outburst. The farmer's fingers curled around the corral rail. He studied the horse the way someone studies a puzzle, waiting for the right piece to reveal itself. He did not see danger the way the others did. He saw fear, he saw confusion. He saw an animal that had been pushed, restrained, and misunderstood for too long. And the horse seemed to sense that he was being seen for the first time. A light gust of wind swept through the tent, sending dust swirling around their boots. The horse's tail flicked, but he kept his eyes fixed on the quiet man at the rail. The auctioneer hesitated, his voice trailing off as he noticed the sudden change in the animal's behavior. A few handlers looked back at the farmer with puzzled expressions, unsure what he had done. The farmer lifted his hand slowly. The crowd held its breath, unsure whether to warn him or watch in silence. Every eye in the tent tracked the movement of his hand as it rose above the rail. His palm hovered there, open, steady, patient. It was a gesture people used with calm horses, not ones known for violence. Yet he didn't break his focus. He let the horse decide whether to step back or move closer. The horse shifted his weight and stretched his neck forward. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. The handlers tried to pull the rope tight, but the farmer raised his other hand gently, signaling them to stop. They froze. No one could believe what they were seeing. The farmer reached out farther. His fingertips were inches from the horse's muzzle. And right as the crowd expected the animal to strike or rear again, something changed so quickly and quietly that it stunned the entire ring. But what happened next would not only shift that moment. It would shift the whole course of the farmer's life. The crowd watched in complete silence as the wild horse stood still, his breath heavy but calm, his eyes fixed on the quiet farmer at the rail. The farmer did not rush the moment. He kept his hand out with the kind of steady patience that told a long story without a single word. And for a few heartbeats that hung thick in the air, it seemed like the entire auction tent forgot how frightened they had been just moments before. The handlers stared wide-eyed, unsure if they should step back or hold their ground. The auctioneer froze mid-sentence, his voice stuck somewhere between surprise and disbelief. Even the dust in the air seemed to settle, waiting for whatever would come next. But the horse didn't step forward again. Instead, he took one long breath, then lifted his head and turned away sharply, pulling back on the rope with sudden force. The handlers scrambled again, and the tent filled with loud movement as people jumped away from the rail. The moment of calm vanished like it had never been there in the first place. The wild tension returned, stronger than before. People whispered that they should have known better than to expect anything good from a horse like that. Others muttered that the farmer had nearly gotten himself hurt. Yet the man remained at the rail, still and thoughtful, even after the horse went back to thrashing. His steady expression didn't change, though something in his eyes grew sharper, more aware. He stepped away from the corral as the auctioneer regained his voice and tried to settle the crowd. The bidding for the horse had not even started, and already folks were saying no one in their right mind would lift a hand to buy him. Some of the richer buyers joked that they might offer $1 just to see him taken off the property, but no one laughed. They all knew the handlers were risking injury every second they stayed close to the animal. A few whispered that the horse might be dangerous enough to be put down one day if no one found a solution. Yet the farmer kept watching from a short distance. People recognized him then. They whispered his name quietly and with a hint of pity. They knew his ranch sat far from town, barely holding together after years of dry seasons and broken equipment. They knew he had no extra money to waste on something like a wild horse. Some folks wondered if he had come only to buy feed or maybe small supplies. Others shook their heads, saying he probably came just to look, since looking was free and dreaming didn't cost anything. The farmer had never been the kind of man to speak loudly. He lived a life built out of long days, simple tools, and hope that didn't always last through the winter. People saw him as someone who kept trying even when everything else worked against him. And though he didn't mind their opinions, he carried their doubts quietly, the way someone carries the weight of a shovel over his shoulder, light enough to lift but heavy enough to feel every hour of the day. While he watched the handlers fight to keep control of the horse, he thought about the first time he stepped onto his land. He remembered the open space, the wide sky, and the belief that he could build a future there. That belief had dimmed over the years, worn down by storms, losses, and the kind of loneliness that tends to creep between the fence posts. Still, he held on. Maybe it was stubbornness, or maybe it was hope. Maybe both. He didn't know why the horse had paused for him earlier. He didn't understand what made the animal stop pulling, not even for a full second, but enough to change the whole rhythm of the moment. Something inside him felt that it meant something. Not a sign or a miracle, just a small thing with a kind of quiet meaning he couldn't ignore. The auction moved on as other animals were brought into the ring. Buyers lifted their hands with ease now, bidding on cattle, sheep, and gentle horses that stepped calmly into place. The earlier panic faded with each sale, but the story of the wild horse stayed in everyone's thoughts. Some folks kept glancing toward the corral where he was tied up with 2 ropes instead of 1, looking restless and powerful again. The farmer wandered through the rows of animals, pretending to inspect other livestock. But every few minutes he found himself turning back toward the wild horse. He kept wondering why the animal had reacted differently when he approached. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe the horse was simply too tired. But he had seen something in the horse's eyes in that brief moment. Not anger, not hate. Something that looked more like sorrow or fear mixed with memory. He had seen eyes like that on animals pushed too hard. He had seen it in stray horses brought in from far fields, animals who had forgotten what it felt like to trust a human hand. He had helped those animals find their strength again, working with patience that most people didn't bother giving. But none of those horses had ever been as wild or strong as this one. A few townsfolk stopped him as he walked by. They teased him lightly, asking if he planned to buy the beast everyone feared. They laughed before he could even answer, acting like the idea was too silly to take seriously. Someone joked that he didn't have enough money to buy a bale of hay, let alone a dangerous animal. The farmer took the comments quietly, offering a polite nod before moving on. He didn't like being mocked, but he had lived long enough to know when it wasn't worth fighting back with words. The auctioneer eventually announced that the wild horse would be brought back out near the end for any final bids. Most people rolled their eyes or muttered that they wouldn't stay long enough to witness it. The handlers admitted they hoped someone would buy him fast, just so they wouldn't have to keep dealing with him. They tied the horse to a sturdy post near the back of the tent, where he continued to pull, snort, and toss his head at anyone who got too close. The farmer stayed near the shadows of the tent, half hidden from the crowd. He watched the horse's movements again, studying how he reacted when people walked by. Most of the time, the animal snapped his head toward anyone who approached. But when the farmer stepped a few feet closer, something changed again. The horse's ears lifted forward, and the fierce tension in his body eased just enough to notice. Not much, but enough to make the farmer pause. He let out a small breath, unsure what to make of it. He didn't step closer, but he didn't walk away either. He stayed there for a long moment, watching the horse settle his hooves and breathe with a quieter rhythm. The wind outside picked up again, brushing the edge of the tent and rattling the metal hooks, but the horse barely flinched this time. Instead, he kept glancing toward the farmer with a gaze that felt more curious than afraid. Something about that gaze made the farmer's heart beat heavier. Maybe it was the same feeling he had when he first stepped onto his ranch, believing things could grow even when the soil looked dry. Maybe it was a piece of hope that had gone quiet inside him and was now waking up. The mystery pulled at him, drawing him closer to a decision he wasn't ready to say out loud. As the auction neared its final round, the sun dipped lower outside the canvas walls. Shadows stretched across the ground like long fingers reaching for the last of the day. People packed up their purchases, loading wagons and trucks. The crowd thinned, but the story of the wild horse kept drifting through conversations. Everyone had something to say about the moment the animal froze for the farmer, yet none of them understood why. The auctioneer finally stepped back into the center of the ring and called out for the last item of the day. His voice was louder now, but the hesitation was still there. The handlers brought the horse forward again, struggling even more than before as the animal fought every pull. This time, only a small group of people stayed behind to watch. Most wanted to see if the horse would be sold or if the handlers would give up entirely. The farmer moved to the edge of the ring once again. The horse spotted him immediately. The wild force in the animal's movement slowed again, just like earlier, though his body still trembled with energy. The handlers exchanged confused looks. The auctioneer blinked twice, trying to understand what made the animal react so differently to this one man. The farmer kept his hands at his sides, not reaching out this time. He simply watched. The horse's eyes met his, steady and unblinking. A quiet tension built between them, invisible to most people, but strong enough for the few who noticed to feel on their skin. And as the auctioneer prepared to speak, something began to shift in the air once more. It was subtle. A small change in the horse's breathing, a shift in the farmer's posture. A hint of something neither of them understood yet, but both recognized the moment it formed. The tension grew, the mystery deepened, and everyone who remained knew they were watching the beginning of something no one could explain. What came next would not only change the sale that day. It would change the lives wrapped around that moment in ways the crowd was not prepared to witness. The days passed with a quiet pressure that everyone in the village could feel, even if they could not explain it. Ever since the moment Leo stepped into the pasture and managed to calm down the wild horse, whispers followed him everywhere. People watched him with a mix of hope and doubt. Some believed he had a special gift. Others thought it was only luck. Leo tried not to pay attention, but the weight of those looks stayed with him. He still had no idea why Storm, the horse that had refused everyone, reacted gently to him. Leo woke early each morning and walked to the ranch, almost pulled there by something he could not name. Storm would lift his head the moment he heard Leo's steps. The boy felt a strange pull, too, as if the horse trusted him more each day, yet he also saw a nervous shine in Storm's eyes. It was like the horse was guarding something, and Leo sensed it even if he could not explain it. The mystery grew in his mind, and he did not know whether he should lean into it or step back. Mr. Grant, the millionaire who owned Storm, watched everything with a serious face. He had spent years trying to tame the horse through every expert he could find. Nothing worked. He hired trainers from across the country. He built special enclosures. He tried different techniques, stormed through every rider. Now, after watching Leo for days, Mr. Grant felt a mix of confusion and frustration. How could a young village boy accomplish something that professionals failed to do? The village ranch workers had their own opinions. Some kept their distance. Others came closer, trying to talk to Leo, hoping to learn something that might help them understand Storm's behavior. Leo answered with honesty, which only confused them more. He had no secret trick. He simply acted the way he always had. He spoke calmly. He kept movements slow. He looked at Storm like he was a friend instead of a challenge. Still, that did not explain why Storm only trusted him. One afternoon, while Leo brushed Storm's coat, he noticed a thin scar near the horse's shoulder. It was small but old, and it made Storm flinch even though the touch was gentle. Leo pulled his hand back and looked into Storm's eyes. For a moment, the horse stepped away as if expecting pain. Then it returned closer, pressing its nose softly into Leo's shirt. It was like Storm wanted him to know something, but could not show it with words. Leo felt a knot form in his chest. Someone must have hurt this animal before. That thought made everything heavier. Leo became quiet during dinner that night. His mother noticed right away. She asked him what was wrong, but he shook his head, not wanting to worry her. He knew that his family depended on every small job they could get. Working at the ranch helped them. If he brought up any concerns about Storm's past or how the millionaire handled things, it could mean trouble. Still, he could not shake the feeling that something was not right. The horse's fear was deeper than simple wildness. Meanwhile, news about Leo and Storm started spreading beyond the village. Travelers passing by heard stories about a young boy who tamed a horse that no expert could handle. Some came just to see if it was true. They stood near the fence and watched the boy lead Storm across the pasture. The attention made Leo uncomfortable, but Storm handled it even worse. The horse paced, snorted, and lifted dust into the air. He kept glancing toward the far end of the field as if expecting someone he feared to appear. Mr. Grant noticed Storm's reactions too. Instead of brushing them aside, he grew more focused and strict. He began questioning his staff, asking what might have happened to Storm before he bought him. The workers exchanged uneasy looks. A few of them muttered about the horse's past owner, a man who no one really spoke about openly. Leo listened from the corner of the stable, heart thumping. The more he heard, the more he sensed there was a hidden story behind Storm's fear. One worker mentioned that Storm had been part of a racing ranch before. Another added that he heard rumors about harsh training methods. Leo's hands tightened around the rope he was coiling. These small hints painted a picture he did not want to imagine. No wonder Storm reacted the way he did whenever someone tried to force him into anything. The horse was not simply untamed. He was carrying memories of something that left a mark deeper than the scar on his shoulder. The tension around the ranch grew thicker with each passing day. Mr. Grant pushed for faster progress. Leo tried to protect Storm from anything that made him uneasy. The workers debated among themselves. Some asked Leo for advice, hoping to learn how to get close to the horse. Others whispered that Leo was becoming a problem because Storm depended on him too much. The boy felt caught between everyone's expectations. He wanted to help Storm, but he also needed to keep his job and avoid causing trouble. One morning, Mr. Grant asked Leo to ride Storm. The request struck him like cold water. He had never tried to ride the horse. He only worked on calming and gaining trust. Riding felt like a big step, maybe too big. Storm stared at him with eyes that seemed to ask for reassurance. Leo swallowed hard. He did not want to push the horse into something that might break their fragile connection. But with everyone watching, refusing was not simple. Mr. Grant stood with arms crossed. The workers stood in a quiet circle. Leo felt pressure from every side. He stepped toward Storm and placed a hand on his neck. Storm's muscles tensed, but he did not move away. Leo whispered to him, hoping to calm both of them. He knew the moment he tried to mount would test everything he had built. Just as Leo lifted his foot toward the stirrup, Storm's ears shot up. The horse jerked his head and stared toward the far corner of the ranch. A dark truck had stopped outside the fence. A man stepped out slowly. Storm backed away with strong urgency. His breathing grew loud. The reaction was sharper than anything Leo had seen before. Even Mr. Grant paused. Leo followed Storm's gaze. The man from the truck leaned against the fence with a cold expression. Something about him made Leo's stomach twist. The workers exchanged nervous looks. Whispering rose around them. One man muttered that he recognized the newcomer. Another said he hoped he was wrong. Leo's heart pounded as he tried to steady Storm, but the horse kept pulling away with rising panic. Mr. Grant approached the fence and spoke to the man, but Leo could not hear the words. Storm stomped the ground. Leo held the rope tightly, trying to keep the horse from hurting himself. The man outside the fence kept staring at Storm in a way that felt threatening, even from a distance. Leo sensed that this man had something to do with the horse's past. The kind of past that left scars. Storm's trembling grew worse. Leo whispered to him again, trying to keep him grounded. But the tension wrapped around the ranch like a tightening rope. No one knew what the stranger wanted or why Storm reacted with such fear. The uncertainty made the moment feel even heavier. Something big was coming, and no one was ready for it. Leo kept his hand on Storm's neck, trying to give him comfort. The horse pressed closer, shaking. The stranger stayed right where he was. Mr. Grant grew visibly tense. The workers kept glancing at each other. Everyone waited to see what would happen next. Leo felt the weight of the conflict settling like a storm cloud ready to break. And the mystery around Storm's past darkened further, leaving everyone with more questions than answers. Storm kept shaking against Leo's side, and Leo could feel the horse's fear like a deep vibration through his arm. The stranger outside the fence did not move. He just stood there, watching Storm with a cold, fixed stare that made everyone uneasy. The workers shifted slowly, whispering among themselves, unsure whether they should step closer or stay back. The ranch had never felt this quiet, not even during the earliest mornings. It was the kind of silence that felt full of warning. Mr. Grant walked toward Leo with a tight jaw. He glanced at Storm and then at the stranger. His voice was low as he told Leo to keep the horse close. Leo nodded, but his hands were sweating. He could sense Storm's panic rising again. The horse looked ready to bolt, and Leo knew if Storm ran now, no one would be able to stop him. He whispered to Storm gently, trying to anchor him, but even his soft voice felt small in the heavy air. The stranger finally pushed himself off the fence and stepped closer. Storm jerked back so hard that Leo almost lost his grip on the rope. The stranger raised his hand slightly, not in greeting but as if testing how Storm would react. That small gesture sent the horse into another wave of fear. Leo tightened his hold and kept his body steady, trying to show Storm that he was not alone. Mr. Grant stepped in front of the stranger, blocking his path. Their voices were low but intense. No one could hear what they were saying, yet everyone could see tension rising with every word. The stranger pointed toward Storm once. Mr. Grant's face darkened. The workers exchanged looks filled with worry. A few of them backed away, as if expecting something bad to happen. Leo watched everything with a pounding heart. Storm leaned against him, still trembling. The horse's trust in him made Leo feel responsible in a way that scared him. He was just a village boy. He did not know how to handle men like this stranger. But he knew one thing clearly. Storm was terrified of this man, and that alone told Leo everything he needed to know. Mr. Grant finally stepped back from the stranger and signaled for two workers to come closer. They hesitated but did as told. Leo felt a darker sense of worry as the stranger walked toward a shady spot near the fence, waiting calmly. Something was unfolding behind the scenes, something Storm understood long before the rest of them. Leo decided to walk Storm farther away from the man, hoping to ease the horse's fear. But Storm stopped halfway across the pasture and refused to go any further. His eyes stayed locked on the stranger. Leo placed both hands on the horse's neck, feeling the rapid breath. Storm seemed caught between running and freezing. Leo whispered again, but it did not calm him this time. Mr. Grant called Leo over after a few minutes. Leo hesitated, unsure if he should leave Storm, but one of the workers stepped beside the horse and offered to hold the rope. Storm snorted and pulled back, refusing anyone else. Leo knew he could not walk away yet. He told Mr. Grant he could not leave the horse alone. Mr. Grant paused, then nodded for Leo to bring Storm with him. They approached the fence slowly. Storm stayed tense, but he kept moving as long as Leo did. Mr. Grant introduced the stranger as a man who once owned Storm. The words hit Leo like a hit of cold wind. Storm's old owner stood a few steps away, staring at the horse with no sign of remorse or care. Leo felt Storm shift uncomfortably and press into him again, as if wanting to hide behind him. The man claimed Storm belonged to him legally and that he had come to take him back. His voice carried a sharp tone that made Storm flatten his ears. Mr. Grant argued back, saying he bought Storm fair and square. The stranger insisted that the sale had never been completed properly and that Storm was still his property. Every word felt like a threat, not only toward Mr. Grant but toward Storm too. Leo felt anger rising inside him, something he rarely felt. It grew from seeing Storm react in fear to every word the stranger spoke. The workers listened closely, many of them shocked. They had never seen Storm respond this way to anyone. It became clear that the man had done something in the past that left a deep mark on the horse. Even without details, the truth hung between them, clear to anyone paying attention. The argument grew louder. Mr. Grant refused to hand Storm over. The stranger refused to leave. The workers began to gather behind Mr. Grant, showing support, yet their nervous glances made it clear they did not know what would happen next. Leo stayed quiet, focused on keeping Storm from panicking, but even he felt the rising pressure. When the stranger stepped forward again, Storm reared slightly, lifting his front legs in fear. Leo stumbled but held on. The workers rushed closer, ready to intervene, but Storm dropped down before they reached him. Leo steadied the horse, breathing fast. The stranger smirked in a way that made Leo's skin crawl. It seemed like he enjoyed the reaction he caused. Mr. Grant ordered the man to step away from the fence and leave the ranch until legal matters were settled. The stranger did not argue this time. Instead, he took a slow step back and said he would return soon. His voice carried an unsettling promise. He turned and walked to his truck with calm strides, as if he had already won half the battle. Storm did not relax until the truck disappeared around the bend. Even then, he kept shaking. Leo felt drained, his arms burning from keeping the horse steady. The workers whispered among themselves, unsure what the stranger would do next. Mr. Grant stood with stiff shoulders, staring at the empty road. He looked both angry and worried. Leo had never seen him like that. The ranch felt different after the stranger left. The peaceful routine was replaced with a sense of threat. Something was coming. Everyone could feel it. Leo knew Storm felt it more than any of them. The horse stayed glued to him the entire day, refusing to let anyone else near. Even the breeze that usually calmed Storm seemed unable to reach him. Mr. Grant spent the next few hours in his office making calls. The workers prepared the ranch in subtle ways, closing gates, checking locks, moving equipment. Leo stayed with Storm, brushing him and trying to ease the fear that refused to leave the horse's eyes. He wondered what had happened in the past that made Storm so terrified of that man. The scar near his shoulder held more meaning now. When the sun began to set, the ranch grew even quieter. The workers gathered near the stables, talking in soft voices. Leo listened to bits of their conversations. Some believed the stranger would come back at night. Others thought he might try to take Storm by force. Mr. Grant warned everyone to stay alert and remain close to the central barn. Leo felt a tight knot in his stomach. The thought of Storm being taken away filled him with a fear he had never felt before. He walked Storm into the stable to keep him safe for the night, but Storm refused to enter. He kept looking toward the road as if expecting danger to return. Leo understood the fear too well. He stayed with the horse outside, leaning against the fence. Storm stood close, brushing his head against Leo's shoulder from time to time. The night air felt heavy with tension. Every sound made the workers look up. Mr. Grant checked the gates multiple times. Leo stayed beside Storm, his eyes scanning the shadows. He felt a strange mixture of fear and determination. He was just a boy, yet he knew he would not let anyone take Storm away without a fight. Hours passed like this. The quiet grew heavier, stretching nerves thin. Storm kept breathing fast, lifting his head at every distant noise. The ranch lights glowed softly, creating long shadows across the ground. Leo stayed awake, knowing something was building, something that would push all of them to the edge. And the feeling only grew stronger, as if the night itself was holding its breath, waiting for the moment when the real conflict would break open. The night felt longer than any Leo had lived through. Storm stood close to him, still alert, still staring at the road as if his old fear would return any moment. But as the hours passed, the heavy tension that had wrapped itself around the ranch slowly began to ease. By the time the first pale light touched the sky, the workers who had stayed awake through the night began relaxing their shoulders, convinced they had made it through. Leo was exhausted, but he stayed beside Storm until the sun rose fully. Mr. Grant came out of his office as soon as daylight settled. He looked tired, but calmer than before. He approached Leo and placed a hand on his shoulder. He said he had spent most of the night talking with authorities, lawyers, and anyone who could help. For the first time since the stranger showed up, Leo saw a little hope in Mr. Grant's eyes. He explained that the papers proving Storm was bought legally were now confirmed. The sale was listed, recorded, and verified. The horse belonged to the ranch. The stranger had no rights over him. Leo felt a wave of relief so strong that he almost staggered. Storm seemed to sense it too. The horse lowered his head and finally breathed normally. It was the first calm breath he had taken since the day before. Mr. Grant told Leo that the stranger would still need to be dealt with, since he had made threats and caused distress to the ranch, but he could no longer take Storm away. The ranch would handle whatever came next. When the workers heard the news, many of them clapped Leo on the back, praising him for staying with Storm all night. They admired his patience and quiet strength. Leo felt shy with all the attention, but he appreciated their kindness. He had not realized how much the ranch hands had been watching him and learning from the way he handled the frightened horse. A few even admitted they had doubted him in the beginning, thinking a young farm boy would not be able to handle a troubled horse like Storm, but they had been proven wrong in the best way. Storm finally allowed the workers to come close again. He even accepted a hand on his neck from one of the older men he trusted. Leo watched with gentle relief. It showed that Storm no longer felt danger in the air. The more the ranch calmed down, the more the horse softened. It felt like a new morning in more ways than one. The ranch had survived a dark night, and so had the bond Leo had built with Storm. Later that day, an officer arrived to speak with Mr. Grant and take notes about the stranger's visit. Leo stood nearby with Storm, listening quietly. The officer examined the fence area where the confrontation had taken place. Storm kept his head near Leo's shoulder, watching everything with careful eyes. Leo felt proud of him. Even after all his fear, Storm was still standing strong. The officer assured Mr. Grant that they would keep an eye on the situation. The stranger's behavior was concerning, and they would contact him officially to warn him about trespassing. After the officer left, the ranch slowly returned to its routine. Workers headed back to their chores, animals were fed, and the usual sounds of the ranch began to echo through the fields again. But something had changed for everyone. Leo felt it too. They all seemed more connected now, like the long night had tied everyone with a shared sense of purpose. Mr. Grant called Leo into the office that afternoon. Leo entered nervously, unsure what to expect. Mr. Grant closed the door and told Leo to sit. He thanked him for his courage, explaining that Storm trusted him in a way no one else on the ranch had achieved. He said that when he first agreed to hire Leo, he only expected simple help around the stables, but the boy had proven himself far beyond that. He had shown heart, patience, and a rare understanding of animals that could not be taught from any book. Then Mr. Grant revealed something that made Leo's breath catch. He said he wanted Leo to officially become Storm's caretaker, with full responsibility and authority over the horse's training. Leo stared at him in disbelief. He had never imagined such a role would be offered to him. Mr. Grant smiled and reminded him that Storm had made the choice already. No one else could calm the horse like Leo did. No one else stood with him during the hardest moment. The position was not just earned, but deserved. Leo accepted with a grateful heart. He walked out of the office with a feeling he had never felt before. It was more than pride, it was belonging. He had come to the ranch as a simple helper from a small farm, unsure if he would fit in. Now he stood as someone the ranch trusted, someone who had found a purpose. Storm nudged him gently when he returned to the pasture, as if he knew everything. Over the following weeks, Leo spent more time training Storm with patience and steady routine. The horse slowly began to trust others again, but his strongest bond remained with Leo. Their connection became known throughout the ranch. Workers admired the way Storm followed Leo with confidence and how Leo guided him with soft words and careful touches. People from nearby settlements came to observe the horse who once made crowds fear him at the auction but now stood calm beside a young caretaker. As Storm grew more relaxed, his strength and beauty became clearer. He moved gracefully through the open fields, showing hints of the horse he had the potential to become. Leo helped him through each challenge, never pushing him too far. Bit by bit, Storm shed the fear that had lived inside him for so long. The ranch hands often said the horse seemed to come alive again. One afternoon, as Leo and Storm walked along the fence line, Mr. Grant approached with papers in his hand. He explained that these were new documents that officially listed Leo as Storm's handler in all ranch records. He wanted to make sure no one could question Leo's authority over the horse, especially after the trouble they had faced. Leo took the papers with deep gratitude. He could hardly believe how much had changed since the day Storm first trembled under his touch at the auction. The stranger never returned after the authorities contacted him. Word spread that he had moved to another town. The fear he left behind faded slowly as the ranch moved on. Storm no longer stiffened at every sound, and Leo no longer felt the weight of danger around them. Peace settled into the ranch like a warm blanket. By the end of the season, Storm had become one of the most respected horses on the ranch. Not because of his strength or speed alone, but because of the story people whispered about him. They talked about the frightened animal who had once shaken in fear at an auction, the horse whose past nearly broke him, and the quiet farm boy who reached out and changed everything with a single touch. Leo often reflected on how small moments could shift a lifetime. He thought about the first time Storm let him place a hand on his neck, the night he stood guard beside him, the long hours of gaining trust. He never believed that his simple way with animals would lead him to such a turning point. Storm had taught him more than any person had. The horse showed him what patience could do, what kindness could rebuild, and how courage sometimes came in the quietest forms. The ranch grew brighter in the months that followed. Leo felt at home every time he walked into the stables and heard Storm's familiar breath. The workers treated him not as a helper but as family. Mr. Grant supported his growth, teaching him new skills and letting him take part in bigger ranch decisions. It was a future Leo had never imagined but fully embraced. One evening, as the sun painted the sky in soft, warm colors, Leo stood beside Storm in the open field. The horse leaned his head against him with slow comfort. Leo smiled and brushed his mane. The wind carried the scent of fresh grass and birds called from far trees. Everything around them felt right. Storm lifted his head and let out a softer sound than usual, almost peaceful. Leo knew it was the horse's way of saying he felt safe. They looked out at the land together, the ranch stretching out with calm promise. Leo felt a kind of happiness that needed no explanation. He realized then that life had shifted the moment he touched the horse at the auction. The crowd had feared Storm that day, but he had seen something different. And because he trusted that feeling, he found a place, a purpose, and a bond that changed both their lives forever. Their story settled into the land like a quiet legend, one built not on strength alone but on trust, patience, and the gentle courage that brings hope back to broken hearts.